this is going to be the part that would probably be labeled more towards like dashboarding and how to get data out of LimaCharlie and things like that. For anyone who's kind of following along, I'm hitting on like some of the really high level parts of the platform, like things it can do, places data can be sent, things you can move around, so on and so forth. The last little part we're going to focus on, and I made a switch to the last two modules of today, is going to be getting data out of the platform. And this is where you're kind of like, wait, Matt, we've spent all day inside of LimaCharlie. Why on earth would I want to get data out of here? And this is where it's a very, very selfless realization that sometimes you don't want to keep all of your data in here. For example, that alert that we had a little bit earlier where I wanted to send data out to PagerDuty, that's an admission that I'm going to be using PagerDuty as my alerting mechanism as opposed to something else. And that's okay. It's totally okay. Sorry, I'm trying to be somewhat facetious here. It's okay if you want to get your data out of LimaCharlie. We're fine with that. But from an output perspective, there also enters into topics of like reporting. Maybe I want to send like consolidated statistics out to certain places. Maybe I want to generate a little bit more than what's present in some of my detections. Maybe I'm not interested in just this giant list of just detections right here. Maybe I'm interested in a lot more. Maybe I want to send this stuff out somewhere. One of the things that I've noticed in working with a lot of folks in deploying this is that a lot of times they might be utilizing some other SOAR platform. And I want to talk about this from an implementation perspective. For those of you that are like building or looking to build things on top of LimaCharlie, if you've already got a system in place, I'm not saying rip everything out because LimaCharlie answers all of your questions. Right? Not the case at all. In some cases, you might be like, hey, Matt, the final like 10% of what we do actually works really well. We have a ticketing system. We have a bunch of call trees. We have a bunch of severity handling. It's all working really well. It's just the other parts that are a little bit, maybe a little bit cumbersome or maybe a little bit tired and old, and we want to streamline those. I don't want you to change that last part if it's working well for you. I like LimaCharlie for all the selling points of it, the data retention capabilities and just anything and whatnot. I like the ability to write DNR rules, but I don't want my analysts to have to be in this dashboard. Totally okay, because we can serve as that pass-through and that filter if need be, and that's where output options come in. And I'll go all the way back to my original thing earlier today about AWS S3. And has anyone here ever logged into S3? Gosh, that's painful. Anyone ever dealt with data in S3, like trying to mass delete stuff or whatnot? Gosh, that's painful. Whitney's laughing. Someone else is nodding their head. It is painful to do all of that. Does that mean S3 sucks? No. It's doing exactly what it was designed to functionally do, which is to be simple, secure storage. And my point to that is not always the place where I want my analysts to live. That's not always the place where I want them to be. Sometimes I want to have a little bit of an easier option for them as well. So with that being said, we're going to hop out of like our detection options and whatnot, and we're going to talk about outputs and what outputs are and ways to utilize them and ways to kind of craft and construct things that might be a little bit different in integrating LimaCharlie with some other tools. So first off, outputs are exactly what they sound like. It's getting data out of LimaCharlie. I'm not going to lie. The description here is slightly misleading. Integrating data from LimaCharlie, it's outputting. You're outputting data from LimaCharlie to other cloud tools and whatnot. Now, y'all remember earlier when we talked about adapters and we talked about getting data in? Same exact approach applies. Same exact thought process and methodology applies on outputs. What do you want to send and where do you want to send it? The opposite of this is, what do you want to ingest and how do you want to ingest it? We covered that earlier. Now we're talking about what do you want to send and where do you want to send it? I'm going to spend some time talking about some of these different streams here because I think these are things that people don't necessarily know about. A lot of times, the default reaction from everyone is to just send detections everywhere. Oh, I wrote all these detection and response rules. Obviously, all the things that I care about are in the forms of detections. I'm going to want to send them off to something. So they turn on the detections out. I'm going to tell you all right now, if you go and turn on Sigma rules across a Windows environment, your detection stream is going to be as busy as the event stream, 100%. It's going to be busy because you're going to have false positives. Now, you're going to go in and you're going to tune them. You're going to whittle them down and do all that kind of stuff. But it's not going to be necessarily as efficient as you think it is, right? But That doesn't mean detections is bad. We'll talk about ways to kind of cut that down if we need to. But what you might actually be looking for is, I want to send detections out, but I'm going to pare it down. We'll talk about how to do that in just a moment. But you might also be interested in other things that happen in the environment. Notice at the bottom, we've got billing, but then we've got things like our deployments, our audit logs, and our artifacts. Y'all notice how those kind of mirror the alternate targets we can detect on as well? Exact same approach. I've got management, I've got executives, I got leadership who's interested in deployments, who's interested in billing. Maybe if I'm the person responsible for deploying that fleet, I want deployments. I want to know when sensors check in. I want to know if we go over quota. I want to know those different types of events. And I want to send that stream out to a different out to a different output, because I'm going to be reading that. That's not for everyone. My junior analysts, my interns, sometimes even my senior analysts don't need to know that we just spent $100 last month on something. Not relevant to them, unless I say they're responsible for costs. So I'm not going to send billing to everybody. The flip side of that is, my executive leadership does not need a report of every detection that is ever fired. So my outputs are going to be your first way to kind of call down and craft what you want to send and who you want to send it to. When we talk about integrations with other products and other things that are out there, this is where you also get to pick and choose what you send out. And we'll talk about that one in just a moment. Where I really want to zoom in, though, is right here. I feel like this is an output capability that's not used enough by a lot of people, only because I would use the heck out of it if it was me and I was building like IR or something or MDR or something on top of it. And that's the tailored stream. The tailored stream allows you to actually create a dedicated use output stream that contains only the events that you send to it. I'm going to show you exactly how this comes together, but you'll notice it's in this output action of DNR rules. So we've got to go to our DNR rules to actually make this thing actionable. We're going to put our mic back there. Hopefully I can still talk into it and y'all can still hear me. I'm going to come back to my DNR rules here. Let's just pick up on, I don't know, what was the thing we were talking about earlier? Clear, right? Let's come down here. And let's say I'm interested in this. And I'm going to kind of freehand this really quick. Linux command cleared on critical system, right? So let's just drill into this. That's not how you spell critical. So one of y'all should have caught me on that. There we go. So that response action of an output, I'm going to have both these things up simultaneously. There we go. So that response action of output tells LimaCharlie, hey, I want you to throw that event into a very specific stream. It's going to be the tailored output stream. It's not going to contain detections. It's not going to contain billing. It's not going to be audit logs. It's going to contain only the detection rules that trip an output into that particular stream. By having a dedicated tailored output stream, I can have an environment as vast as I want. And then I can have a unique little output that only goes to certain people. Case study. Let's say I'm running an MDR service and I'm providing, one of my customers has 1,000 endpoints. We'll keep the numbers really simple. They've got 1,000 endpoints. We fall into an IR and 6 endpoints have been compromised via whatever. Someone clicked a thing or drive-by download or whatever it was. Do I want all 1,000 to fall under the same scrutiny of those 6? Do I have the manpower for that to happen? Do I have the personnel to say, we're going to investigate all 1,000? The way that we would investigate those 6? Absolutely not. But use case, am I going to deploy detection and response rules that are unique to that incident? Absolutely. Am I going to modify detection and response rules? Am I going to spin up an incident command team? Am I going to do all the things that you would do for a response? Yes. What do I do with all those detections then? Do I want my analysts who are keeping the wheels running over here, responding to the same alerts while my incident team is dealing with this over here? I want to create separate streams for them. I want my analysts doing their job. The incident team has this one covered. Don't worry about it. But how do I separate those communications? How do I write detections unique to an incident, but keep them out of the purview of the team that doesn't need them? Obviously, I'm dropping some precursors in here of you having a big enough team to support this. But in some cases, that output action is going to be the way to get there. It's going to say, if this thing fires, it is unique to this particular incident. I want you to send it to this unique particular output stream. And what we do with that output, we'll talk about in just a second. But what it does, it lets me create a really dedicated way to alert a team, a dedicated team, that just a thing has happened. And I can do all of that in my detection and response rules as well. And what I like about that option is I could hop back over here and I could say, uh-oh, the adversary has moved out of Linux systems, and they've hopped laterally over to our Windows systems. And now, all of a sudden, bits admin is super critical to this investigation. And I might come back here and, hang on, that's not how you spell it. I might come back here and I might say bits admin has fired on a critical system, and I might want to add more information, like such as a host name or something like that. But my point being, by having that tailored output stream, you've got an option to create a dedicated thing, a dedicated output for a certain moment, or as long as you need it, that only hits a certain team. This can also work the other way. It doesn't have to be just incident response or malware related. I could also create a tailored stream for like, over quota events. Or remember we talked about that cron functionality. I could create a dedicated output stream that sends that cron output to a certain destination if need be. So go ahead and dump packages once a week from all my Windows sensors and send them out to some database somewhere. So that way I've got that information out there if I need it. But that's kind of a high-level overview of the what. What do I want to export? What do I want to look at? All right. Then we get into the question of where do you want to send it? So I'll just pick on detections. This one's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to walk through every single one in here, but I do want to talk about some options to integrate with some other really cool products that are out there. This one is very straightforward in the sense of pick a destination. Do you want to send it to like an S3 bucket or a storage blob or one of those other things? We get into some more kind of use case driven, such as SCP, SFTP, SMTP. We've got integrations with other products that are out there, such as Tines and Torque. This is one that I see used quite frequently for obvious reasons. This is a simple webhook out. And this is where I love LimaCharlie's ability to be on both sides of the webhook if need be. So you can set up a webhook input that essentially sets up a listener and waits for data to come in. You can also have webhooks as an output, which beams that data out to where you need it to go. In this case, we're just gonna provide a destination host if we need to, a secret key if necessary, and that data is gonna be sent out. We'll do one of these in just a moment, but let me talk about some ways to kind of manipulate and change this a little further if you want. One of the other advanced capabilities that you get in outputs, and I know it says advanced options, so I'm not necessarily reading the page to you, but one of the other more advanced ways to manipulate outputs and to control what is being sent and where it's being sent to is to change it at the output level. The use case for this right here is I'm sending way too much data to my data lake, to my storage, to whatever it is. How do I cut and trim and cull this data down? We do that right here. So let's say, hypothetically, you were sending all of your Windows event logs to a particular platform. This actually happened to me earlier this year. Not happened to me, I read about this. We were working with someone who was integrating with some sort of next-gen XDR AI platform. And the directions from the AI platform were, forward us your Windows event logs. We will apply AI to them, whatever that means, like a skin bomb or something, and we will analyze all of your data and send you back AI-enriched alerts. The data they were getting back only contained 5 Windows event log IDs. 5. They were like, every single thing you send us is in one of these 5. I'm sending you gigabytes of logs a day, and the only analytics I'm getting back are on 5 Windows event IDs. Now, if you're a security person, you're thinking to yourself, are these 5 the most important Windows event IDs? Meaning that's what generates all the activity? Or are these 5 the only things that you're actually analyzing? Guess what the answer was? The latter half. Guess who was paying for storage for all of their event logs to only have 5 event IDs actually analyzed at the end of the day? Now, like, of course, the fine print exonerated everybody from any sort of liability there. But I'm going to tell you, if I was sending you a cumulative terabytes worth of data and the events you were sending me back was based on like 3%, and the other 97% was not getting analyzed, was not getting looked at, and was just ignored, what are you doing with that data? And why am I paying for it? Now, if the idea of future model AI training and whatnot comes into place, cool, but I'm still paying for it. This is where we can kind of cut some of that down. So here's exactly what we did. They deployed their EDR, they deployed our EDR sensor. They collected Windows event logs through it, and they went to that AI company and they said, if you're only going to analyze 5, we're only going to send you those 5. And you're going to store only what you're processing, only what you're analyzing. We did that here. We did that by coming in here, and we specified a few things. The first thing that we did is we came in and we said, give me a tag. So I'm going to use a tag of something like Windows, right? Number 1. Now, number 2 is I don't necessarily have a detection category to go out, but I can pick on WEL events. WEL events is my Windows event log events, obviously. Not obviously, but like saying event twice made it sound even more weirder, if you will. And weirder is not a word. But I can select the type of sensor, or I can select the tag if I want to. I could even do a platform specification. But all we did is we simply came here and we said, send these things. I only want you to send WEL events. And we also went a little bit further and we specified if it matched something, the category field was this. It was XDR AI WL. I think that's what we called it. I can't really remember. But it doesn't matter. For the purpose of this discussion right here, we wrote a detection and response rule that said, if the event ID matches one of these 5, fire a detection that was called that. XDR AI WL events. By the way, that was not visible to the analysts. It created a detection, but it did not show it in the dashboard. So analysts went through, didn't know what was happening. They like, okay, cool, this is just normal detection stuff happening. But from an infrastructure perspective, we were writing that detection and response rule, gave it a separate category, came over to the outputs and said, if you find this thing, we want you to send these events off to this company so that they can do their processing and analysis. None of this was indications of a breach. This was data streamlining. This was data efficiency at its core. We were simply just looking for ways to say, I don't want to send all of the things off. I only want to send a small subset out. Now, could we have gone another way and done this? And let me just kind of demonstrate what that is to like illustrate this as well. Rather than sending detections, what if I just came to events? And I went to events here, and down in my events, I dropped in the exact same type of thing where I dropped in Windows as my tag. I was going to specify WEL events, right? And I might come in and try to drop some additional filters in here that look for that particular category. Well, that could also work, but the detections category worked just fine. But the point I'm trying to make is when we talk about outputs in LimaCharlie, this is not just, okay, send your stuff to a ticketing platform or send your stuff over to some sort of SOAR for additional alert enrichment or whatever it might be. This is going to be, where am I sending my data, and is there a way for me to make this process more efficient? Is there a way for me to trim this down so I can save a little bit of money on the storage out there? That data lake that I'm sending to is super pricey. Is there a way for me to make this thing more efficient? And absolutely, there always is. There's always a way to make it more efficient if you need to. Now, I will note that other types of security processes and notifications can be featured in here as well. So for example, let's say I had an email that I wanted to send out. When detections got fired, I wanted to send an email out to a particular group or to a call tree or something like that. I might come in and I might want to say, all right, tell you what, if a certain thing gets detected, be it malicious activity or a certain program gets installed or whatever it is, I want to immediately notify the IR team. So I'm going to do that by creating a group email, and I'm going to configure LimaCharlie every time that thing happens. I'm going to want it to send that particular detection out to the IR team. How would you go about specifying which systems to alert on, though? Anybody know? Knowing what you know now. What's that? Come on, Chris, what you got? I'm going to come right here, and I'm going to say IR. What's the date today? October 2nd? Right? Let's just call it this one right here. I don't know. However you label your IRs. I'm going to have a detection and response rule that says, here's my list of bad stuff. If any of this is found on a system, I want you to tag that system IR 2024-10-001. I just made that up, right? Whatever it is. And I'm also going to use that tag as an output directive. And I'm going to say, not only is that tag being applied when things are seen maliciously, that tag is also going to be used what guides my communications out. So if a detection is found, Cool, normal stuff happens. If a detection is found and it happens on a system that has been identified as compromised, choom, send this out. Now, I'll just wash, rinse, and repeat my words from earlier today. Can I templatize all this and deploy it ahead of time? Absolutely. So take that entire conversation we had before the break about spinning up all of these rules, all of this infrastructure, all of these extensions, and deploying them prior to deploying a single EDR sensor. Now, put an output in there that says anytime one of these things trips, I want you to automatically email the IR team. Now you're the IR team. You send your customer the installation package. You just sit back and wait for emails that say, hey, has this thing been compromised or not? I'm oversimplifying the process a little bit, but the more I can automate and build procedures and processes in there to help identify when something happened, the easier it's going to be for my team, and the more processes we can build around this thing is going to alert us when it automatically happens. And again, we can drop in different categories, we can use tags to help us figure out what's going on, and we can allow and disallow certain types of events because they might just be so voluminous. Quick note, this right here, the specific event types and the disallow specific event types, folks, that is not false positive control. I just want to be really clear and let everyone know that's not where you determine your false positives by being like, okay, don't include all these 50 things, but include all these 100 things. No, it's the other way around. You'd use false positive control in the platform and use here to whittle down a little bit if you needed to. So for example, show me, all process events, but don't do existing processes or something like that. There's other options down here at the bottom where you can determine what to include, what not to include. These are going to change based on the output type. For example, if you were to send a webhook out, there's no auth login or auth plane or start TLS. Those are email headers or email directives or SMTP directives, I should say, that come out of it. But then you've also got the ability to flatten the JSON if you need to, and depending on how the output platform wants to receive it, you've got the ability to control it in there. Let's talk really quickly about this, because this is actually going to be an important concept as you get more familiar with LimaCharlie. When events are received by the platform, and we're going to hop over into a sensor really quick, down to our timeline. Give me a new process event. 1, 2, 3. I was hoping it would be like right there. There we go. There's one. When you see a particular event come into the platform, whether it's an EDR sensor, whether it's a log, third party, whatever, there's also this routing category that goes with it, or I should say this routing thing. This routing syntax, what am I going to call this thing? Routing component. There we go. This routing component goes with it, and it contains a bunch of information about that particular event. You can see it's things such as event IDs, event times, architecture, tags associated with it, sensor ID, platform, so on and so forth. This may not be of value to your output platform. So when you see in your output configuration the ability to include it or not, it's saying, do you want to include all of this stuff in there or not? And if you don't want it, you don't need to have it. That's totally okay. That's definitely something you might not need in there, because if you take a look, in the event itself, I've got the different metadata about the event that kicked off, but some of this routing stuff might not be necessary. We won't delve too much into routing today, but it is another way to kind of loop back into LimaCharlie and kind of pivot on different events, but we're going to leave that one out of our discussion for today. Getting into outputs, one of the other things that I wanted to bring up was not only do you have the option of obviously configuring outputs to generic destinations, but very similar to a lot of the data ingestions, we've also got some pre-built output options for certain applications and platforms. So if I wanted to send data out to Slack, for example, we've got that pre-built kind of Slack API token input that you can just, generate, drop in, and it will just automatically work, or should automatically work. Same type of filtering options happen at the bottom. Do I want to apply things for certain tags? I'll go back to my IR use case. If I create an IR, or if I create a channel in Slack or some other chat application for that particular team who's responding to a particular incident, I'm going to use a Slack output to just send things out to that channel. And rather than having my team log in and check to see when stuff has happened, I'm just going to have a dedicated output stream going out there. So if I combine a couple of these output options here, if I'm using the tailored output stream, which is unique to my DNR rules and unique to the rules that trip, and I couple that with a dedicated team output, and I couple that with like a Slack output or something, there are a myriad of ways to notify the team that's investigating that, hey, something has happened, something's occurred, something has taken place, and we need to go investigate and dig into it a little bit further and whatnot. I like this. It makes it super easy to integrate with other platforms if need be. The last little one that I'll mention is going to be a tool like Tines, for example. No comment as to whether there will be Tines representation here at Mission Control. I'll leave that there. But if you wanted to look at using graphical or really kind of user-friendly based automation platforms, things like Tines and Torque and whatnot make that super simple. Because we're an API-based platform, Tines and Torque can also loop back into LimaCharlie. So I can say, hey, Tines, I'm going to send you detection output. And if you see particular detections or alerts come through, I want you to issue response actions back to that sensor, back to that platform. So there's another way to expand on kind of that responsive capability, which is not just so much, okay, I've got a bunch of detection and response rules, but instead I'm going to actually utilize a third-party platform to do it. One of the other things that I mentioned in kind of like some of the abstracts and stuff for today was also the idea of dashboarding. Quick note, if you click dashboards here inside of LimaCharlie, this is a dashboard for LimaCharlie. It is not your security dashboard. There aren't donut charts and that kind of stuff. I think I've said donut charts 4 times today. These aren't donut charts and stuff. This is actually the performance of the platform itself. If you go to a dashboard for S3, it is files uploaded and whatnot. It is not the contents of those particular files. So think of it this way too. The dashboard for LimaCharlie is going to be LimaCharlie statistics. Different events that have come in, how many sensors have been online and offline. I do not know what happened back here. I guess something went crazy back then and whatnot. Notice I've generated a bunch of different detections today as well because we've been in the platform messing around and whatnot. But long story short, this is going to be a representation of stuff happening inside of the platform. I have to give huge props to a very awesome member of our team who will remain nameless for just a moment. However, I just want to note that if you wanted to output data to a particular visualization platform, we've got that built in here for you as well. And I'm happy to talk about this because it was just released. Look at this right here. You ready? Boom, just released. I'm kidding. It was released the first variant of this was a while ago, but nonetheless, we'll leave that there. Huge thanks to Whitney for being awesome. But nonetheless, there we go. There's a much needed applause, but we'll do it at the end. If you wanted to send your data out to a visualization platform, something like an Elastic or an OpenSearch, I want to first talk about the division of duties. Because you might be like, wait a second, Matt, I'm already sending all my stuff into LimaCharlie. Why on earth would I duplicate all that data and send it to something like OpenSearch or Elastic? I got to pause. If your mind immediately goes to the place of duplicating all your data, you haven't been listening for the past 20 minutes. I don't want you to duplicate all your data. I want you to say, I'm going to use this thing as a visualization platform. What is it I'm trying to visualize? That's the data you're going to send over. That's it. Cull it down and pair it and parse it as much as you need to. But if I'm looking to say, all right, my team utilizes OpenSearch for visualizations. We're picking on OpenSearch because up until about 2 weeks ago, Elastic was walled off by this stupid open source clause that they tried to implement. That's gone now, apparently. But nonetheless, I would just say if you wanted to output to a visualization platform, output what you need to get value out of that visualization platform. Now, I'm not going to spin up an OpenSearch instance primarily because we've got some screenshots here and I've had some issues with the internet being about as stable as a baby deer. AV team, not your fault. I know you guys can hear me and see me. It's not your fault. It's my computer. We'll just rest on that. But I want to drop a quick note and say, if you wanted to output to something like an OpenSearch or an Elastic, it's built in. The options to output to those different platforms is right here. And Whitney, we even built some really cool kind of dashboards to help you get familiar with that. There's a good walkthrough on how to get there, but if I wanted to get insight and I wanted to drill into things such as the events or the detections, the enrollments and whatnot that's happened inside of my tenant or inside of my organizations, here's how you would be able to get there. I'm referencing this work because I like to just be like, hey, here's some examples. Here's ways and things that you can build and where you can potentially find some value in outputting this data to another source. But look at how we just came full circle on a lot of things that we've talked about today. When I say writing a dashboard, I'm not talking about a Christmas tree of criticals, highs, mediums, and lows. I want a dashboard of sensor deployment. I want to see how many sensors were deployed yesterday, today, a month ago, within the past month, whatever it might have been. I might want to look at detection information at a high level. How many detections were fired today versus yesterday? Maybe I want to drill down into them further. Show me detections with a tag, a certain particular tag on them. Audit events, speak to the platform itself. Show me what my users are doing, some of the things that they've been doing. Sorry, I just got a phone call. Some of the things that they've been doing and what they've been observed. That's where you might want to offset to a particular visualization platform and use that accordingly. Again, we picked on OpenSearch here, but really any of these could be tied into it. Elastic and Datadog, I think, also enter that category. But I kind of want to remind everyone here, when I talk about outputs from a LimaCharlie perspective, I'm not talking about let's mirror all of the data into some other thing so we can just replicate all this work. Use LimaCharlie as like that scalpel. Use it as that sledgehammer and that scalpel. Send all your stuff in here, pare it down, send me just the stuff that I'm interested in, and beam that out to the visualization platform, because that's really what I want to visualize. I don't want to visualize the number of esoteric events that came out of Windows event logs. I want to visualize how many times Matt's user logged in over the past week. Very specific questions I want to be asking. So let's utilize the platform underneath the hood to help build the answers towards those. Because I'll kind of give you the opposite approach. Anyone here ever done any work in Splunk? I'm looking at Eric and Andrew very specifically because I know the three of us have spent a lot of work. How proficient do you have to get in Splunk queries to get to the place where you're like, okay, there's the thing that I actually needed? Admittedly, it can take a while to get to that point. And then the security approach becomes, let me just build these dashboards with all these complicated queries that give me the little answer that I'm looking for at the end of the day. And you're managing all of these queries, you're managing all of this process. What happens if an index changes? Your query's broken. What happens if we no longer ingest that data? What happens if a thing changes? And I'm not picking on Splunk in particular, I'm just using that one because I know there's some personal experience in the room. But you're becoming a query manager at the end of the day, where you're managing complex data queries to join and link a bunch of stuff together, but you're still sitting on top of all of this super expensive data lake. Folks, if you're doing analysis for your customers or for your team or for your enterprise or whatever it is, and you find that at the end of the day, you're really only analyzing 5, 8, 10% of your data, the rest of it is just for retention or regulatory requirement purposes, then just send that out. Don't need to be sending everything over. It feels like a lot of overkill. And a lot of times the infrastructure that you might be maintaining or managing to send all that out is a little cumbersome and tough to deal with. So I think outputs also becomes like this nice philosophical rant about data reduction and only working with the data that you actually need to work with. So that's how I like to think of outputs, is a way to get data out of LimaCharlie so that I can do something additional with it, but only in a micro form. If you're simply mirroring everything out to a certain place and you're just like, hey, LimaCharlie, thanks for the retention, but I'm going to do all my other work over here. We spent today analyzing a bunch of different systems under the hood that you can use to streamline that, to make it a little bit more efficient, to find ways for optimization, automation, whatnot, and things like that. Couple final pieces of the platform here, because believe it or not, in about 10 minutes, I have to hand the microphone over. I'm going to miss you, old friend, but I'm going to hand the microphone over to some other folks who have done some amazing things that they've built out with LimaCharlie. I wanted to hit on a couple of other smaller little pieces that don't necessarily get as much magnifying glass, but maybe in some cases they should. Not sure if you knew this or not, LimaCharlie's got file and registry integrity monitoring built in. This is where we take the idea of detection and response rules and we're like, wait a second, what if I could just monitor these particular locations for certain things rather than, sorry, I'm looking for it here, rather than write a detection and response rule that says, hey, look for every single time this file is written. What if I could ask the sensor to instead monitor that particular location? And you absolutely can. It's got file and integrity monitoring in it where I can say, here are certain paths that I want you to monitor because I'm going to deem that either to be a sensitive path or it's a place where sensitive data exists. I want to know if changes happen in this place, and I want to know if there's something that occurs that I should be aware of. This isn't so much a targeted detection and response rule like this is bad, but it's a question of this is a path or a file that I'm interested in. Tell me if it changes, platform. I'm not going to write a DNR rule for it. I'm going to let the platform just simply monitor it for me. I like this one as well. It's another way to monitor things like password locations, Mac OS keychains, and whatnot. So utilize these as shorthand ways to actually drop in some pretty neat detection and response rules if you need. If you've got an adversary who's known to write things to a certain destination or to a certain location, absolutely 100% monitor that location. Don't think of detection and response rules like, oh, I got to write this super complex rule. What if they write all these files? Just monitor that path. Users public always gets my first mention in here because it's a directory that adversaries love. It's world writable by all the users and whatnot. It's a place they like to store malware. Folks, I've done this stuff for a long time. I've never seen a legitimate entry in users public that didn't beg a question. Okay? And the question is either, what are you writing there, or what is this thing? And if you can't ask the person what they're writing there, then that person shouldn't be writing there, right? There's a way to link those together to be like, basically it's a bad person or it's a sysadmin getting smart. Nonetheless, we don't want those to happen. There's other things built into the platform as well. Services or extensions and capabilities like reliable tasking allow you to make sure that jobs or tasks that you've created still extend to sensors once they turn online. So if you've got a fleet of laptops or you've got a subset of systems that are, going offline and online every now and then and whatnot, you've got the ability to still say, hey, the job is still going to extend to them once they work. The last little thing I'll mention, because someone did ask me about it earlier, and I do think it's another powerful part of the platform as well, is the idea of lookups. Lookups gives you the ability to create your own kind of referenceable lists, your own referenceable lookups, for lack of a better term, or a cyclical term here. What lookups do is they give you a way to create and manage, I'm reading manager, saying the word manage. They give you a way to manage things of interest. So let's say I've got a list of, hashes. And I'm curious if a hash that shows up in code identity ever matches one of these things in a list. This is pretty typical of security events. I might walk into an incident and I get a list of indicators ahead of time. I might get a notification from my ISAC or a third-party report. Maybe I've got a third-party intel report that just dropped on the market, and I want to take those and turn them into indicators inside of LimaCharlie. I am not going to go write a bunch of detection rules that say, if hash equals this, or this, or this, or this, or that. I'm going to write one rule, and what that rule is going to do is it's going to reference a lookup manager, and it's going to say, hey, take those code identity events, look at this list. If it shows up in this list over here, fire it. It's a detection. We're bad. We're in a bad space. I want to know if this thing has happened. Lookups allow you to get there, and it makes it super easy. But let's talk about another way to operationalize this and make it better. One other thing you can do when you create a lookup is you can also have it referenced in what we're going to call an ARL, a resource link, that allows you to actually store it, if you want, in something like a Git repo. You can store it inside of LimaCharlie if you want. You can store it somewhere else where it can be dynamically managed and updated. So we talked earlier about things like detections as code and whatnot. I can also have lookups be these dynamic sources that I can reference. The cool thing about this is I can take that detection and response rule, and I love this workup because I went through this with someone. We're just looking at the example. We're not going to go look at the actual data itself. But here's a test, a way for this to work. I can create a lookup that's being stored at GitHub. And what I'm essentially doing is I'm essentially saying, hey, LimaCharlie, I'm going to create a lookup that exists over in GitHub, and I want you to take the data from this list, bring it in, and I've got a detection and response rule that compares against this particular list. So let's call it a list of IP addresses. I've got a list of malicious IP addresses that I got from my customer or I got from my own intel generation or whatever it might be. I'm going to use that as a lookup. I'm going to write a detection and response rule that says anytime you find a network connection to any one of these IPs, fire a detection. Now this is a, yes, ma'am. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm almost done. Thank you, though. What that detection and response rule is going to do is it's going to use that lookup as a reference point. Let me ask you all something. If you had a list of malicious network addresses, would you want to use that for one customer or for all your customers? All. How do we scale that out? Detection is code, copy paste that detection and response rule, synced. So I have this one lookup that I've got in a dynamic location. I now scale that across all of my customers. What do my analysts have to do to keep that thing up to date. Do we have to update all of our tenants? No. Do we have to change the detection and response rule? No. All they have to do is add or remove an IP address to the list. And that's it. This, for me, is like the ultimate analyst workflow. We've got a GitHub repository with a couple files that we're using. Let's just keep the math simple for our head. I've got a file for hashes, a file for IP addresses, and a file for file names. Analysts, as you come across a particular indicator, update it inside of that repo. Commit, add, or reverse order, add, commit, sync, done. Add, commit, sync, done, 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 done. We work our way through the investigation, and this list of malicious indicators that we've got is growing as our investigation unfolds. Or I can bring it in from some sort of a case management tool if I want, and then have LimaCharlie point to that exact same list and say, if you find anything that matches one of these, it's bad. I'm going to take that rule and I'm going to scale it across all of my organizations, infrastructure as code simultaneously. I've been given this really loose case study today of what if I did all of this stuff ahead of time? What if I created all these rules and all these outputs and all these options in a template, and I created all of this ahead of time, and every single time an incident response spun up, I was already collecting data. I was already working through this automated workflow. Lookups fall into the exact same thought process. What if I created my lookups ahead of time? Customer calls and says, hey, Matt, we've been breached. I've got this security incident. Here's what I've been told by a third party, or here's what I've been told by my Intel report or whatever. Here's all the indicators that we've been given so far. My analyst workflow is this. Start a new engagement, give the customer the installation agent package, and go add those IOCs to the predefined dynamic lookups that we've got. That's it. That's how we get started. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying some things. You got to work out billing and legal and all that kind of stuff. But from a technical perspective, I've solved a good amount of the issues. Now, the moment a sensor gets deployed, we're automatically pivoting on all the indicators my customer gave me. We're automatically collecting forensic data. We're automatically collecting stuff like user logins, packages. We're automatically parsing Windows event logs. All of these different chains of events have all strung together, and all by one YAML file and a little bit of preparation ahead of time to just get myself in a place where the moment I launch into an incident or the moment I get a new customer and I deploy in their environment, all that tedious stuff just happens automatically for me. So my analysts, they don't literally sit back and wait, but they're there waiting because my alerting mechanisms pre-built, detection mechanisms pre-built. So all we do is we say, oh, customer gave me an IP address. There it is on these 3 systems. How do I know it's on 3 systems? Because the tags automatically update. I can pull a list at any point in time. 3 systems compromised, 4 systems compromised, 5 compromised, so on and so forth. Detection rules give me rules as they come in automatically. Slack channel just starts to turn into a Rolodex and a Christmas tree. And then all of a sudden, this like little platform of a bunch of little pieces starts just doing most of my heavy lifting for me. My analysts just have to sit back and do their job. Analyze. Actually figure out what's happening here. Go collect evidence if need be. Hey, we need to collect more evidence than what the baseline was. You've got Velociraptor, go get it. You need to actually collect something off the system or the system itself. There's an active adversary on it. One click, isolate it. You're done because we've got a functional EDR sensor on there. So what I wanted to do today, and I'm starting to wrap up in my final minute or so, final minute and a half. What I wanted to do today was really spend a lot of time on how I conceptualize and see a bunch of the different parts of the platform coming together. There's a reason I started out today with opening the AWS page is I wanted you to be like, that's a lot of stuff. And I feel sometimes the same thing can happen when you open LimaCharlie. You're like, what do you want to build today? And it's like, that's a lot of stuff. Deer in headlights look comes up really easily. But if we kind of take it piece by piece and we're like, all right, well, the first thing I need to do is provision access for my users. And then I need to add telemetry and start bringing it in. I'm going to modify and change the telemetry to match what I need it to be. And I'm going to start looking at detection and response rules to help augment and modify what is it I care about, what questions do I actually care, what do I want to know about the environment. I find that I need a little bit more to answer my questions. Let me bring some extensions and enrich my data. And the next thing you know, I've got this kind of well-oiled machine that underneath the hood is just bringing in processing data, automatically moving stuff where I need it to go. Chess pieces are moving around the board without me really doing much. Now I want to output that and I want to tell my team about it. It's all there. Taking it piece by piece allows you to, I think, build out a really powerful concept if you need to. But again, just understanding how the different little elements and the cogs work together is a really useful task.